Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Elizabeth Gessel, and I'm the Director of Public Programs at Museum of the African Diaspora in San Francisco. MoAD is a contemporary art museum, and our exhibitions and programming inspire learning through the global lens of the African diaspora. I want to take a moment to acknowledge the challenging circumstances we are all in, and I hope everyone in the audience today is safe and healthy. MoAD stands in solidarity with Black Lives Matter. We honor and mourn the senseless murders of George Floyd, Ahmaud Arbery, Breonna Taylor, Tony McDade, Casey Goodson Jr., and Andre Hill. We grieve for so many others who have lost their lives at the hands of state-sanctioned violence and racial injustice, including those whose names we do not know. As this list continues to grow, MoAD will continue to say their names, as our commitment to honoring the victims and to attaining true racial justice is unwavering. As many of us are settlers, immigrants, or descendants of those forcefully brought to this continent, our institutions were founded upon exclusions and erasures of the indigenous peoples on whose land we are located. With deep respect, MoAD acknowledges that even in virtual space, we reside on unceded native lands and thank the indigenous people of the Bay Area who have stewarded this land throughout the generations. Today, I am located on the unceded lands of the Chochenyo Ohlone people. I welcome you to MoAD Online and today's program, Making Space, Artists and Organizers of the Black Space Residency in Conversation. I want to thank everyone here today who has joined us, with special appreciation for those who have donated to the museum during this pandemic. We would not be able to produce this programming without your support. So let us know where you're joining us from by typing it into the chat. We love to find the diaspora in our audience. I will introduce our moderator, and they will introduce our guests. Elena Gross is the Curatorial Manager of Exhibitions and Emerging Artist Program at Museum of the African Diaspora, and an independent writer and cultural critic living in Oakland, California. She received an MA in Visual and Critical Studies from the California College of the Arts in 2016, and a BA in Art History and Women, Gender, and Sexuality Studies from St. Mary's College of Maryland in 2012. I'm going to turn it over to you, Elena.
Thanks, Elizabeth. And thank you, everyone, for joining us today. I want to thank all of my wonderful panelists as well. So I'm going to be introducing each one of the panelists. These are going to be somewhat condensed bios, but we highly recommend that you visit the Black Space Residency website to read more about each of the panelists, as well as the other institutional partners for the residency as well. So we're going to start with Erica Deeman. Erica Deeman lives and works in Seattle, Washington. Deeman received a BFA in Public Relations in 2000 from Leeds Beckett University, a BFA in Photography in 2014 from Academy of Art San Francisco, and is currently an MFA student at UC Berkeley. Deeman is the recipient of the 2019 Headland Center for the Arts Residency, a 2016 TOSA Award finalist, and has had solo exhibitions at Anthony Meyer Fine Arts San Francisco, the Berkeley Art Museum and Pacific Film Archive, Museum of Photographic Art San Diego, and Lawrence Miller Gallery in New York. Next, Ashara Ekundayo is an independent curator, artist, creative industries entrepreneur, and organizer working internationally across cultural, spiritual, civic, and social innovation spaces. Through her company, AECreative Consulting Partners, she places artists and cultural production as essential in equitable design practices, real estate development, and movement building. Her intersectional worldview offers both an Afrofuturist and radical Black feminist framework to the public sector by centering the lives, traditions, and expertise of Black women of the African diaspora. Moultrie Saunders is a San Francisco-based photographic artist, landscape architect, and teacher who lives in the Bayview neighborhood. He is originally from Jamaica, Queens, New York. His artwork is in the San Francisco Arts Commission Civic Art Collection for works he completed for the San Francisco Library. Linda Brooks Burton Bayview Branch, Zuckerberg San Francisco General Hospital and Trauma Center, Laguna Honda Hospital and Public Utilities Commission's new headquarters in San Francisco. Visual artist Binta Ayofemi shapes new urban forms and urban materials. Ayofemi's upcoming exhibitions, Black Space and Black Monuments in 2021, Ayofemi's activation of vacant sites from an urban meadow to a reimagined cornerstone suggests a state of mutability and transformation. Ayofemi's first buildings as artwork, Commons, Guild, and Yard open in spring 2021. So welcome, everyone. Thank you for being in conversation with me today.
Hey, I'm so happy to be.
Hey. So happy to have you.
Very exciting.
So I think the best place to begin to kind of kick this off is to really get a sense of how a Black space residency came to fruition. And so I want to direct the first question primarily to Ashara and Erica, because I know that the two of you collaborated pretty closely on this idea. So how did the idea of beginning a residency for Black artists and creatives come together?
Take it away, Erica.
Thank you, Ashara. Thanks, everyone. Well, you know, I think it all begins with holding space. You know, there are 30 studios at Minnesota Street Project where Black space residency is held, and only 3 of us are Black permanent residents there. And one of the things that kind of really was the catalyst for this idea was kind of applying for a grad school place. And so I was kind of in the process of applying for grad school, and one of the key questions for myself was what is going to happen to my space when I'm at school? And you know, thinking about the relationships that I have with Binta and Ron, I knew that there was going to be an absence, and how could that absence be filled, and who was going to fill it? And kind of having this intentionality around holding the space for Black creatives. And so as this application process was kind of continuing, and I found out that I was awarded a position at UC Berkeley, which was my #1 choice, which is so exciting. I remember the day that I received the email, just this wonderful gift. That's when the catalyst kind of was continuing. And so I wanted to hold this Black space and kind of take care of Ron and Binta in my absence in a way. And so knowing that you can't do this on your own, that we need a family, we have our community, I reached out to Ashara and kind of started floating this idea of like, you know, you've had this gallery dedicated to Black, female, queer, non-binary artists. You've held your own residency there. So how can we collaborate together and kind of found this residency and create this space, which is so important?
Yeah, you know, I can agree with all of that. And I remember just the quandary that you were, and really one of the first things you said is like, I don't want Ron and Binta to be alone. I don't want them to be alone. And so for me, like that first heart feeling that, you know, I want to take care of my siblings was the primary, it was just the primary feeling that I got from you. And then of course, because I had experimented with shifting my commercial gallery at the time that was in downtown Oakland into a summer residency for Black artists. It was called the Omi Art Summer Studios. And then Erica, you subsequently became an instructor and taught a couple of classes as well in the gallery as part of our Gaze series, that we knew how to do this. You know, there isn't anything, as Octavia Butler says, you know, there's nothing new under the sun, but there are new suns. It's like, you know, creating this new opportunity and being insistent on holding Black space for creatives and for Black creatives. And then, you know, it was kind of easy from there, you know, we can figure this out. You know, I think the part that was also important is that we bootstrapped it by inviting other Black artists, Black creatives to help us pay for it.
Yeah, so I don't think I realized originally that Binta and Ron were the only other 2 Black permanent residents at Minnesota Street Project. So it makes so much sense, obviously, that they would be a part of kind of the structure of this program and taking part in sort of the facilitation of the residency program. But I'm also curious as to how, you know, beginning with the 2 of you, but then all of the other kind of community partners that you brought in, how did you how did you go about deciding who you wanted to kind of build this network with and these other pillars of the residency?
Well, we started asking our friends. Erica called a couple of her friends. One of them is Rodney Ewing, who is also a member of the collective. I called Melora and Melanie Green, who are the co-directors of the African American Art and Culture Complex. I also kind of tapped into my platform, Artist as First Responder. We have an anonymous member as well who put some money in, and then we just spread out from there. And it's not that money is the only valuable asset that is being shared with us. This is an experiment in the abundance that we know is available to us, because this is our legacy. We got us, we take care of us. So there are also artists and creatives who are taking care in other ways. You know what I mean? Binta and Ron are the two artists who really onboard the fellows. They onboard the artists in residence. I don't spend very much time at all at the building, but Ron and Binta do. So it's like, meet up with the Minnesota Street Project building manager and hand them over to Ron and Binta and kind of like walk through not only through the building, but the politics, the psychic and the spiritual politics of being in the space and how that might feel. And the three of them have stories to tell that I don't have those stories to tell. But what has been, and I really want Ron to chime in here, because our process of how long we thought it was going to take, Erica thought, oh, we can do this next month. We can figure this out, go get the money. And it took months. And so much that was the conversations that we were having between the group of us on the importance and the stress and the strain and the weight that has been carried by Black artists in primarily white spaces. But what has been happening for these three Black artists in that space. So those conversations were just heart-opening, beautiful, and vulnerable. And all of that process was necessary for us to be able to now show up and be able to offer a space for imagination for other people.
Ron and Binta, I'd love to hear, how you came into this process and what that was like for you.
Go ahead, Binta.
You were about to say something though, Ron.
Yeah, you go ahead, Ron.
Oh, well, what I was going to say is that I was really pleased when Erica said she was thinking about holding a Black space, because the three of us have been there since the beginning of the Minnesota Street Project was founded. And I think that's really important for people to know. That means we've been there for about almost 5 years. And we were entering a white space. And so we actually bonded fairly quickly because we became the community that needed to support each other while we basically transported ourselves through this white space. And then with BSR, Black Space Residency, being set up, I really felt protective of new Black people coming into this space and not wanting them to get wrapped up in the politics that are going on behind the scenes, because they're there to be creative and to use their time the way they want to. So it was really, for me, it was really important to make sure that Erica and Ashara heard my experiences of being in that space and basically, how to maneuver through it.
Binta?
Yeah, so beautiful to be here, and really a gift to get to work with Erica, Ashara, Ron, and to meet with you, Elena, in this context. So, I think for my own practice, I'm very much interested in the holding of Black space, formally and informally, like where it happens. And so I think part of the reckoning that's happened across the country in terms of foregrounding Black, Indigenous, and trans lives has been to, I think, really not only say where we're going, but who is around us And are you taken care of? Do you have anything you need? And so I think that kind of look around to the circle and creating circles is really something that, working in different collectives as an artist and community, I've really been just so blessed to like keep learning about that. And I feel like this year, with all of the Zoom calls and people having to organize in a different mode, it also affected this particular organizing. Like, this collective was able to really transform and deepen our relationships. Like, Ashara and I had already had contact in Oakland, just kind of really blown away by Ashara's incredible practice of curation of Black voices, and having been a beneficiary of that and being brought forward. And then within San Francisco, the fact that San Francisco and Oakland are even so siloed as a part of this legacy of redevelopment and segregation that has, even keeps us across. So one of the, I think, the beautiful things about Black Space Residency has been to have this initiative coming out of this dialogue with Ashara and Erica, and then presenting a dialogue within our larger group where we actually said, holding space, especially in the context of Black African American space, Black space, which suggests also being here. It suggests Black diasporic space, which you could be in London, Oakland, San Francisco. You could be Black in Australia. You could be Black anywhere. And Black Space Residency allows us to ripple out and think about what happens this year, what happens next year, and how we can really shift paradigms. And I think the last thing that I'll say to this point of like formation was, it just happened by chance. Again, we hadn't had a chance to discuss this because everyone had been, not seeing each other for like a 10-month tunnel, right? Eight to 10 months, no one's seeing each other or barely seeing each other. So I've been working on a Black space exhibition based on Black spaces that are being activated in Oakland and San Francisco. So East Oakland, downtown Oakland, and Bayview. And so I often spend a lot of time in the studio more in the more early mornings, kind of as a contemplative space. And the Minnesota Street Project was a big gift for me to be able to like gather my thoughts and rest, even though I have this nomadic practice where I'm working in different Black neighborhoods. And so I feel the way that the studio can be an oasis, and it's going to be different for everyone. I feel like we're starting to really honor that in this retreat. So I'll let everyone say more about that, but that's been the biggest inspiration, is the collective organizing and the idea of oasis and retreat and what that means for Black space.
I love that. I love that idea of both oasis and retreat, and of course, what we continue to return to, this holding its space, this holding this Black space and caring for Black space. So recently I had the privilege of hosting your inaugural artist in residence, Chanell Stone, on an episode of In the Artist Studio. And one of the things she talked about, she kept coming back to, was how important, how integral having access has been a boon to her career, her career as an emerging artist. How having access to grants, having access to residencies, having access to exhibition opportunities has been the main thing that has helped make her successful, and the thing that she wants to help to pass on to other artists as well. And I see this residency opportunity as being a much needed, it is that question of access. You are providing this access to so many Black artists and Black creatives. And I was just wondering if each of you could talk a little bit about that, and how an opportunity like this one or something similar has directly benefited your practice, and how that has helped to formulate this project that you're undertaking. And anyone can start.
I mean, I think that, the facilities, firstly at Minnesota Street Project, are outstanding. And, as I entered the building, pretty much defined as a photographer, kind of thinking about what I had access to has kind of shifted my practice into a kind of interdisciplinary place. And, that definitely wouldn't have happened if I hadn't had that space, if I hadn't have learned how to use the kiln, kind of use the digital printing facilities. you know, kind of had access to a staging gallery. So kind of understanding the impact that it's had on my practice, kind of that gift of being able to share that was just so exciting, and you know, was kind of really another driving force for us coming together, was to kind of grant more access. And I think what I'm always reminded of is that not, you know, we're all in different places, and kind of paying for a studio monthly is an expensive thing to do when we are all in this place right now, kind of looking to move forward and kind of understanding the restrictions that might be placed on us. And so, you know, again, kind of thinking about how we could kind of create a space that was outside of some of the capitalistic drivers, kind of creating a space that wasn't defined by productivity, that there was no ask for any of the artists. You know, there was no donation of a gift. There was nothing really kind of tied to the space, and kind of creating that space of rest was really important. And you know, when I think about the residencies that I've been on, you know, Headland Center for the Arts was another fundamental place for me in my practice. And this kind of metaphorical idea of space, as in kind of the head space that was granted to me there, and also the physical space was kind of transformational for me. And, you know, certainly the environment too, you know, having the ability to be in nature, which is something that, you know, as Black people, we love nature. And when we are there, we thrive. And so kind of having that access was kind of fundamental for my most recent body of work, Familiar Stranger, where, you know, I 3D printed, you know, self-portraits that I created at the residency in, you know, in very much isolated circumstances, and then kind of imprinted them into clay and fired them. So that, you know, I kind of couldn't kind of go, it would be amiss for me not to mention that. But yeah, I think that's.
Visit you. I remember I came to visit you at Headlands while you were
Yes.
printing. I was like, how does this work? And you were showing me the 3D machine and, you know, what you were going to do. And it's a beautiful visit.
That's right. It was such a place of incubation, and I very much see, you know, the residency that we have created together as an incubation space. And you know, I think that so much of what a residency is about the people that you meet on the residency. And so kind of having, you know, Ron and Binta as kind of guides is kind of also, you know, this would be like my #1 residency, you know, knowing the wealth of experience that both of you have, and being able to be in community with you, again, is just another gift.
I want to pick up on a little bit about the access, because I don't think people know what resources are at Minnesota Street. So, you know, we pay a basic rent, and then there are all these shared facilities that we get to use. So there's an amazing wood shop. There's a kiln for ceramics that Erica mentioned. There's a small dark room, and there's the digital lab. And there are also other people doing things where you get invited in to participate. So there's somebody there who's doing printmaking. And all of this was introduced to Chanell. And she was like a kid in a candy store. She's like, I want to do it all. And she's going to. And so those are the kind of resources that are available to certain communities that have entree. And by bringing in Black creatives, it gives them an opportunity to explore, experiment, and see, you know, what can I do with these different modalities? And for me, it's inspiring just seeing people get excited about the opportunities that are there. And it's always evolving and changing. And I will say for myself, I did a transformational residency at Kala Art Institute, which is in Berkeley. And that was when I started creating images without a camera. And I was put into this world of printmakers. And printmakers are drawing on things and imprinting with these machines. And I was inspired by their mark making. And so I decided to try to do that in the darkroom. And so for 10 years, I did not use a camera. I just decided to make these photograms and just use light and paper and objects. So the experience of having access to all of these different places and equipment that you don't know about can change your entire career trajectory. And I think it's really important for people to understand that. It's about the money. It's about being able to be in a place that allows you to think freely about how you want to be creative.
Yeah, that's super important. Erica, also remembering that what we talked about creating the kind of residency that we wanted, the kind of residency that we needed. It's like heal yourself. Like, what kind of environment can you conjure and place yourself in or create to be able to support and place or invite other people to be in that you need? And, you know, at this time where many of us who have the privilege of being able to shelter in place, it is an absolute privilege to be able to stay home. This idea was birthed from that. Without the shelter in place situation dynamic going on, you wouldn't be, you know, away from this location. You know what I mean? You wouldn't be studying, you know, from Seattle versus studying from San Francisco and Berkeley. And, you know, so much of what I think about in terms of being a curator who from time to time is asked to create something as an artist is that I need time to think. And that is what I've been speaking about. That is what fellowship, you know, and kind of like the elitism and canon that goes with that as well. Like, let's not, you know, let's not pretend like that's not part of it. Time to think is a privilege because time is actually the ultimate commodity. And very few people are afforded that kind of gift. And so time to contemplate and time to do nothing without the request of Black performativity. But that was the other piece. It's like, I am not here to perform for you. You're not going to hand me, you know, this small, you know, financial amount of money and then ask me to write you a 50-page report on how you scaled it to support 1,000 people. And, you know, so that piece. And then the last thing I'll say is that I'm actually sitting in my own artist residency right now. Like, I'm in San Francisco as one of the artists in residence with Villa SF. So I'm actually sitting in a home as the artist in residence with my partner, Angela Wellman, who is also doing a co-residency. And this is one of the partnerships that we developed over the last few months with Villa SF and the French Consulate and the, you know, French American Cultural Society. So there's this stretching that's happening right now in terms of what access means and what place means and where we can actually be physically locate ourselves to rest, contemplate, to imagine, to think.
Thinking about what that exact piece of it, kind of a secondary follow-up question to that is, what form of access do you think is still, specifically for Black artists in the Bay Area, do you think are still lacking, or that it's still limited, that you would like to, you know, as we're talking about residencies, we would like to see in the world? What are other forms of access that are still kind of withheld that we would, that you would like to see proliferate after this period of time?
I can speak to that. I think that there's something really powerful about giving yourself permission to embark on a journey for your artistic practice or your creative practice. And especially as Black artists and creatives, often we're working so hard and being put into caretaker roles, which primarily are, you know, basically supporting places without necessarily getting time for reflection, time for, and so what I think is powerful about this project is that we actually are, none of us are, you know, we're endorsing self-care for everyone. And we also are giving ourselves permission to come forward and create a retreat. And I think one of the biggest obstacles now, I think, is that, you know, there are very few actual residencies and support for artists directly. So when I came to Minnesota Street Projects, even though it was subsidized, it was still expensive. So I had to actually like barter my rent in order to be able to have a studio. But it's something where I had to give myself permission and start to apprentice as a form of retreat. So I wanted to learn how to mill wood, and I took a year to do that with working with some people in West Oakland. I needed to learn, you know, more about ceramics. Or so even if you come to a place, you might be so stretched with your own financial needs in the Bay or obstacles like that, that you still need a deeper invitation. And, you know, not everyone gets to go to some of these incredible residencies. I've never personally had a residency, like a formal one. But I think what I want to add to this is to say that we can give ourselves, like nominate yourself as well. And that we hope to like really honor all of the different ways that we show up, whether it's in a formal way that you are working, or if you're curating or writing, or I think those are some of the things that have come out of this as well.
So as you know, as a creative person myself, a lot of this resonates with me for my own practice, but I also am a cultural worker who works for this institution, who works for MoAD. And so one of the things that I'm interested in, especially in this past year of thinking about how institutions can be areas of reprieve and relief, but they can also be complicit in systems that continue to make things challenging for artists. I guess a question that I have is how do you feel institutions can better show up for these cultural workers? Is it through working with spaces like yours? Is it through direct financial giving? What are some areas that you've seen, especially in the Bay Area, that Bay Area arts institutions can be better in better service to artists and creatives?
I can take that on. You know, MoAD was one of our first partners, and you know, and to that end, offered us up the brilliant Dimitri Broxton, who is also a member of the collective as well. And so, you know, one of the things that institutions can do is to invite their staff, you know, people who are thinking with them, either whether it's around education or the curatorial practice, to be in community with the folks who are creating, you know, residencies and fellowships and collectives such as Black Space Residency. Additionally, I mentioned Melanie and Melora Green at the African American Art and Culture Complex. They also, you know, in addition to being like financial partners, offered us up fiscal sponsorship, you know, for Black Space Residency. And I've also been witnessing the way in which they pivoted their resources for 2020 and turned them directly and very generously back into the community by, for instance, creating an accelerator program in which they support 50 Black artists throughout the Bay Area, not just artists in San Francisco, but they actually support them with a stipend as well as coaching and other kinds of resources. You know, so it has a lot to do, I believe, with giving up some control, you know, and allowing yourself as an institution, institutions are run by people, but allowing the institution to maybe soften the hard edges that they've needed to operate under in order to like be considered serious institutions or within the canon or whatever, you know, those trappings may be. You know, one of the many gifts of a global pandemic and folks having to shift and figure out what it means to stay relevant, or to maybe, you know, even believe that you are relevant, you know, is that you allow other people to enter into the conversation. And so you see, you know, Elena, with the Museum of the African Diaspora, the digital programming amped up another 300% by allowing and inviting more and more independent curators and cultural workers and cultural laborers to take on an hour at a time or an hour and a half at a time, the conversation in support and highlighting of the community. on a global level. And so those are two of the examples that I'm witnessing, as well as other spaces.
Yeah, I was just going to say, it's intentional collaborations, I think would be really, really good. And that might mean that people like me get invited to be on boards that I normally wouldn't be part of, because these institutions are there and they're run primarily by white people. And some of these institutions are serving communities of color, but they don't have people of color on their board. And so there needs to be openings where there's an intentional invitation, and an intentional participation, and that's where it can change. SF MoMA is going through this big uproar, and we're all waiting to see how that's going to settle. But it goes back to the board. Who's on the board? Who's running that? And why aren't they inviting people in who don't look like them to participate? So that's all I wanted to say.
I'm sorry. I'm so glad you said that. I think it's so important, and that you mentioned boards, because it is about a redistribution of these resources, but it's also about a redistribution of power, right? And that can't be ignored in this whole conversation. Yeah. So I'm so glad you brought that up. So my next question is, another pillar of Black Space Residency is, beyond being an incubator for new work and activity, is also providing a space, an opportunity for rest. And you've all kind of touched on this a little bit already in your responses, but how do each of you define rest within your practice? And how has it been impactful for you? How is having these opportunities of rest opened up or expanded what's been possible within your practices?
I love that question. I think this is such a special time in general. It's almost like everything is magnified by the fact that we've been on this like corridor of time or portal of time with the pandemic and the transformations around foregrounding Black lives. The fact that this all happened in the same portal, I think, is always informing and intensifying the collective itself. For me, I think rest is a form of power. And when I think of rest as power, I'm thinking of latent systems, again, apprenticing with like some farmers a few years ago, like learning more about like how something has to rest in order to like build up its energy so that it can actually be fortified for years to come. And so you're cycling through. And so the dormancy is not really inactivity. It's a form of gathering strength, information, and new colors, And I feel that this has been an exercise in power for us as a group. And we've been surprised by each other. We already have known each other, and yet there's another layer of power that we've seen from each other, and then what we formed together. And it started to affect, actually, we were able to be part of a shift over at Minnesota Street Projects, where the artists are actually really thinking about how we can actually have all artists have projects that are funded, how we can help each other to be regenerative. And I think it does come down to this notion of rest and power and allowing people to have incentives to have retreats so that they can free up space and then come back. And how do we help each other to travel, whether it's just within SF, like Ashara going to this amazing Villa SF spot, or is it us going to Paris or Bamako or like going to like Lagos, right? So I'm excited to see where we bring this rest as power.
I love that idea of going to Bamako. Love Bamako. Binta and Ron and Erica, I just really want you to talk some more about the catalyst that Black Space Residency has been at Minnesota Street Project. It's like this latent, as you're saying, conversation that wasn't happening until we modeled the possibility of it. And Binta and Ron, you have kept that fire lit over there. And I don't want you to like glaze over it because it's significant. It's a significant situation that Blackness as catalyst in our resting state, that it has activated something that was not happening in Minnesota Street Project.
Well, one thing I want to say about rest is, for me, I'm learning that rest also means learning to say no. And I'm not always available. And Binta had started talking about the transformation that's happening at Minnesota Street Projects. And because we're the only 3 Black permanent artists there, we represent that everybody wants a piece of. And they want us to be at every single meeting. They want us to have conversations with everybody behind the scenes. And I'm learning to say no. It's like, y'all go talk to each other and then come back to me. And then we can talk about it. So that's one of the things that I'm learning, and I'm learning a lot from Binta about give yourself a break. And I meditate every morning before I get out of bed. I let myself daydream. So I allow myself to rest before my day starts. I don't look at my device until 10 o'clock in the morning. So the morning is for me. That's my rest time. And that might mean, ideas are percolating in my head. And I'm starting to write them down because there's just so many that keep popping up. So rest is really important. And that rest means also learning to say no.
I mean, the power of no, Ron, is unbelievable in terms of kind of self-care and rest, and how that is a circle in itself. I think rest is thought. Ashara, you were talking about that, kind of creating a space for thought, even though one may think that thought is also activity, but for me, I think thought is also rest. Having a space that can encompass my being is rest for me. Being able to walk and be by water provides me with rest. To move, to breathe. The air as it circulates around this planet with the energy of our ancestors, that is rest. And so, yeah, I mean, I think that, yeah, that's the rest that I always think about in terms of, yeah.
Yeah, that's all. The revolution is no. Being able to say that over and over. Yeah. And for me, rest also means allowing myself to sleep. And sleep being a revolutionary act for Black people, and particularly for Black women. Being able to sleep and being able to dream and enjoying that dream state, allowing the dream state to take wherever, and not feeling any kind of way about it, not feeling any pressure or guilt around sleeping for 10 hours a day, which is a practice that I gifted myself with for most of 2020. Once we were in shelter in place, I realized the level of exhaustion, the core exhaustion that I operate under in my giving and giving and giving. And if I woke up after 5 hours, I went back to sleep for 2 until I slept for 10 hours. And I did it almost every day from March until December, regardless of where I was, 10 hours. So that is also the rest.
It makes me think also, just to add one thing, it makes me think about not only the Underground Railroad, or when you have to build from anew, you need rest. You need that shift, so that suddenly You can become a builder, you can become a cultivator, you can innovate or invent something. And I feel like that's something that we are practicing and rehearsing. And it did come up in the larger group with the other artists, because we have some presence of Black, Brown, Indigenous, queer, trans, just people of color that actually started to come forward more at Minnesota Street Project. And we were able to really, in that spectrum, rehearse how we could all show up for each other, and then have room to take a step back, because you're building a canopy, and then the canopy can remain. So we don't all have to hold the structure up all the time. And so I think that this is why, for me as an artist, I've been so interested in regenerative structures. Like, what does that really mean? And I feel like breathing into this with this incredible shining group, I'm learning every day from our collective, and it's something where I've had other collectives that I've been participating with, whether it be Black Cultural Zone, other makers and artisans, but every time I feel like with a collective, you get changed and opened by the experience, and this is definitely one of those opening experiences. And just seeing that power ripple across our group and ripple into the Minnesota Street Project artist group in terms of artist-led spaces, artists being essential, back to Blackness being essential, Black and Indigenous people are essential to the country, what land are we on, giving praise to that, and just shifting dynamics as a whole. So this shift is something that I feel like we haven't even seen the full effects of this transformation. And luckily, with the kind of programming that MoAD's doing, I feel like we just have a lot more to discuss. The shift, everybody, right?
So I have a couple more questions, but I want to also be able to leave time for Q&A for any questions from the audience. So I will ask this one, and then if there are not more, I will keep going. So I think a good, something you all sort of talked about at different points throughout this conversation is what it means to kind of work together in studio space, to work within community and to make within community, and that being a really key part of your holding these spaces, the space at Minnesota Street together. Even though you're working in your own individual studios, you're ultimately working as a collective, even beyond like Black Space Residency. And I was just wondering if you could talk about how the pandemic has kind of affected your ability to be able to work in community, and how working in community ultimately bolsters your practices.
I'll start. It's what's really interesting about the word community for me right now is learning that community is what you build. And I've been, as I said, we've been at Minnesota Street for almost 5 years, and you're part of that community, but I don't feel a closeness to them that I feel with Erica and Binta and Ashara. Ashara is new, but she jumped right in there and helped me process a lot of what's happening at Minnesota Street with this transition that's going on. So I feel that there's a new community that's formed for me, and it's through the Black Space Residency. And it's reconnecting to some of the funders that are helping supporting Black Space Residency. And with my practice, it's actually allowed me to step back more. And by doing that, all these other opportunities have descended on me in a major way, in a way that I didn't know was going to happen. And it's been really interesting, and it's me letting go of feeling that I have to be there all the time, letting go of thinking that I have to have a conversation with somebody about what they're doing or not doing all the time. And it still goes back to, again, saying no, but feeling that right now that I'm part of a larger community and the potential for this community to actually think outside of Minnesota Street Project. I know we haven't talked about this, but to me, the idea that we can come together and find resources to support Black Space Residency for 2 years of complete funding is phenomenal. And to me, it's like, well, we can have our own building that's a complete Black space, a Black creative space that's modeled after Minnesota Street Projects, where it's for people of color. So why can't we do that? And community here is it's really interesting because I'm part of 3.9 Art Collective, and William Rhodes, who moved here from Baltimore 10 years ago, was introduced to me, and he's like, where are the Black artists? And I said, we're here, we're just scattered. We're scattered all over the city. And so there's not been a place where, or community where artists who want to be professional artists, professional Black creatives could actually come together and talk about their experiences and support each other through whatever they're going through in their lives and in their creation. So it's really become, important for me to think about, what is community, and looking for community that's really going to support me, and not thinking that just because I'm part of Minnesota Street Project and I have access to all of these resources, that it's going to support me. It supports me in a way to think about the creation of my art, but how does it support me as a private individual person?
So we have a couple questions in the Q&A. The first one comes from Dira Williams, and she asks, how does one get invited with your organization? Do you prepare those who want to apply for the bigger residencies?
That's an interesting question. So, right now, the residency is formed around Erica's MFA program. So right now it's a 2-year pilot project. And we had decided that for the first year, we would invite folks. And so we've been inviting people who live in the Bay Area, because the residency doesn't include a residential place for the resident to live full time. And so I think, to answer the question, how does one get invited? It really has to do with the collective ourselves, that we have a list of people who we've invited. Had, the honor of hosting Chanell Stone for January and February. Trina Robinson is our March artist in residence, and will be joining us and coming into the space for next week. Aima Paulé is our April resident. Amara Tabor Smith is our May resident. Luceza Brown from Barissimo is our June resident. So it's, some people, you can take 2 weeks or you can take a month. Because Chanell was first and we didn't have anyone on deck, Chanell had 2 months. So I think you can take up to 2 months as well. So, that's how it's happening for this year. And, Erica, you can talk more about what we might do for next year. That will be an open call, and whether or not that open call is, again, Bay Area or California or national, we actually haven't decided yet. That's kind of the beauty of being in process and allowing, what works to emerge, for us. So, emergent strategy. Shout out to Adrienne Marie Brown for gifting us with those words to talk about what we do. And, in terms of how to keep supporting it, some of the other supports are like Adobe, who also has a studio at Minnesota Street Project and has been there, I think, from the beginning as well. Binta and Erica, maybe you could talk a little bit about how their partnership with Black Space Residency supports the residents. As well as like some other residencies that we're talking with, in addition to Villa SF, other residencies that have access to different things in their building that we might also want to talk about. And then the last thing that I would say is that I mentioned that I'm here doing a residency with Angela Wellman, who's the founder of the Oakland Public Conservatory of Music. Angela is a remote Black Space Residency resident. So she's not a person who lives and works in the studio space, but whose praxis is very much around Black intentionality, creating and maintaining a space and art practice that centers Black art and access for Black people to remember and learn about Black music as well. And so we're looking at what might that look like for other folks who we invite to be remote residents who don't use the studio, but who have access to the building. And we'll figure out what that looks like as we go as well. Binta, did you want to say anything about Adobe or?
Sure. So I think what's amazing about what you're saying is about this idea of basically a constellation of Black spaces that are emerging out of this project. We have the literal studio that Erica, has opened up and created this dialogue with Ashara, with all of us, and now with this larger dialogue to the world. And I think that the open call to the question, that the open call is going to be, something which is evolving and will allow us to, the support connect with the support from Adobe. Adobe right now is offering tools. You get year-long access to all the Adobe tools, which can help with all different types of creation, design, art, visual strategy. And Adobe's actually looking at a longer-term engagement, not only with access to their space and access to these tools that is gifted to every person associated with the Black Space Residency, but also looking at how Black creatives that are at Adobe, who have also formed a collective over the years, and how they can actually participate and collaborate and support with realizing Black artist projects from everyone associated with Black Space Residency. So getting to make pairings that might result in books and narratives and visuals and portals for communication. So I think we have an opportunity, with this constellation to imagine something which maybe will have its own building. We can do that. And also maybe have a place for us to stay that's more long-term. So I think everyone's dreams are coming to the forefront.
All right, the next question comes from Victoria Heilwa. Apologies if I mispronounce your name. Would financial support from individuals be helpful for Black Space Residency? If so, how would someone donate?
We'd welcome all seed. Yeah. Go ahead, Eric.
Absolutely. Yes. Essentially the more support that we get financially, the more that we can give back to our residents, and the more we can build in terms of, structure, whether they're physical structures, resources, and also collaborations as well. I think that, kind of working with the triple AECC, working with them as fiscal sponsors, we are very much at the beginning. So, we're working things out, but, we are here, we accept the donations. And I think that, the more we have, it can catapult us into the stars, into the constellation. Ashara, maybe you could talk a bit more about how someone could actually donate. I think we are pretty much in the process of setting that up, but
we're so at the beginning. There was one way to do it where get everything all nice and tidy and then present it to the public, or and I'm not a perfectionist. I don't even expect perfection, but just being courageous enough to go, look, we're going to put it out here. We have some of the things together. We haven't quite figured this out yet. You can definitely PayPal Erica, or Venmo me, or Ron, or Binta, and we can put that on the website. But right now we're probably just kind of at this place where we're waiting for the actual paperwork for folks to be able to get a write-off if they need that, and that donations would go to the African American Art and Culture Complex to support Black Space Residency. But I know that in the vein of mutual aid and how, you know, we folks got it in, you know, and figured out how to gift each other quickly. Definitely tip any of us in our PayPal or our Venmo, and follow us on Instagram, and we'll put that in, we'll make a post. So you want to support Black Space Residency once or monthly, you can follow us. You know, we have a Patreon page in the works as well. So if you are a funder, if you are a person who has some money to gift us, we need that. We're not going to pretend like we've figured this out financially. And we do accept and appreciate all of those gifts or connections to people who would like to explore with us how to build this out, because we need administrative support. We know that there are going to be more and more applications. We know that there's going to be more attention on it. And somebody's got to actually run the residency. And right now we're trying to share bits and pieces of tasks that need to be done. But we're about to be at the place where this needs to be so much about. So.
Yeah, I mean, what's exciting, thank you, Ashara, because what's exciting is that literally for like, you know, $4,000 or $5,000, that could be artists that actually have space uninterrupted to really have that rest, have that retreat, have that space of creativity. And if it's someone doing a major gift, like they really want to make sure that for the next 5 years, artists are supported and there's a place, there's even one more studio opens up, or one that's offsite that's in the Fillmore with the AAC. So these kind of conversations have come up about long-term partnerships, and it's all happening because we are gathered. And then in this gathering, more opportunities may happen from this panel that MoAD is putting together. So it just seems like the gathering keeps offering gifts in a way.
There are 2 questions left, but I also want to be conscientious of everyone's time, which we just talked about earlier, because we are at 1:02. So I would just encourage the 2 folks who dropped their questions in the chat, if you want to reach out directly to the panelists with your questions, that would be great. And I want to thank all of you, all of our amazing panelists today, for being in conversation with me. And thank everyone who is watching on Facebook and on the Zoom programming, Zoom recording as well. I'm sure this will be uploaded to our various archives and YouTube pages later. Thank you again. I'm so excited to see how the residency continues to grow, the different artists who will have an opportunity to work with all of you, and how these, beyond just the actual residency itself, how these ideas continue to grow and germinate and create more space for Black artists and Black creatives in the Bay Area and beyond. So thank you all.
Thank you, Elena.
Thank you, Elena.
Please, everyone, please support the Museum of the African Diaspora. Please either become a member or donate. Make sure you fill out I'm sure that Elizabeth, who's been running tech, thanks Elizabeth, put the link in for filling out the survey as well. And follow all of us. Thank you, Elena. You're such a brilliant writer and curator. We're excited about your latest project.
Oh, thank you. Thank you so much. Yeah.
Going to be posting about it.
I'm trying to be better about it. So yeah,
open
I will.
For the journal that you're curating. So really
yes.
Congratulations and thank you.
Thank you. I hope to see you all again in virtual and/or real space sometime soon.
Yes, please.
Yes.
See you all soon.
Okay, bye. Thank you.
Thank you again.